She murmured an insult in Sicilian. The Mafia boss laughed. "Repeat that, looking into my eyes." The ache started in her feet, a dull throb that had worked its way up her calves and settled deep in her lower back. Lucia Romano, at 24 years old, felt closer to 40. She swiped a damp rag over the last countertop of the Morning Glory diner, the cheap fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, making the puddles of spilled coffee and syrup look sickly. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the end of her first shift and the midway point of her day. Briar Point, New Jersey, wasn't a city that offered second chances. It barely offered first ones. It was a place of brick facades stained with soot and secrets. Lucia navigated it with a practiced weariness. She'd been navigating systems since she was old enough to walk, bouncing between foster homes that ranged from neglectful to openly hostile. She had no family, no safety net, and a tower of trust issues high enough to cast a shadow over her entire life. She collected her tips, a meager pile of singles and change, and stuffed them into the pocket of her jeans, hidden beneath the faded blue apron. Another $34 for 8 hours of work. It wasn't enough, but combined with her night job, it almost covered the rent on her cheap studio apartment. The studio was a box with a rattling radiator and plumbing that coughed, but it was hers. No one could enter without her key. No one could tell her what to do or take her things. It was the only real security she had ever known. An hour later, changed and halfway across town, she walked through the staff entrance of Il Corvo. The contrast always gave her vertigo. The Morning Glory smelled of stale grease and bleach. Il Corvo smelled of money. It smelled of roasted garlic, aged wine, expensive perfume, and something metallic and cold that she couldn't place. Here, the lights were dim, the tablecloths were heavy linen, and the customers spoke in hushed, important tones. Lucia tied the crisp black apron around her waist. Her second job, waitress, or, as the manager, Marco liked to call them, service professionals. She was tough, but the constant grind made her wary. She saw the world through a lens of potential threats. A customer who smiled too readily was a man who wanted something for free. A quiet table was a table that was planning to complain. She moved with an efficiency that was often mistaken for coldness, her face set in a look of neutral politeness that kept people at a distance. Tonight, a Tuesday, was supposed to be slow, but at 8 o'clock, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant opened and the air in the room changed. It didn't get louder, it got quieter. The background chatter of diners and the clinking of silver on porcelain seemed to dip, vacuumed into the silence brought by the men who entered. Marco, the usually unflappable maitre d', visibly paled. He rushed to the front, hands clasped, bowing slightly. "Signor Morelli, we were not expecting you. An honor, of course. Your usual table?" Lucia paused by the service station, stacking bread plates. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Everyone in Briarpoint knew the name. Dante Morelli. He was a ghost story used to scare rival crews, a boogeyman for businessmen who didn't pay protection. He was the reclusive and fearsome head of the Morelli crime family, a man who had inherited an empire and ruled it not with gunfire, but with absolute, terrifying silence. There were 4 of them. 2 were massive, built like refrigerators in custom-tailored suits, their eyes scanning the room with a dead, professional vigilance. One was older, thinner, with a lawyer's pinched face, and then there was Dante. He was not what she expected. He wasn't loud or flashy. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so sharply cut it looked like it could draw blood. His hair was dark, his face angular, and his expression utterly blank. He moved with a predator's economy of motion, wasting nothing. He was cold, sharp, and silent. As Marco fawned over him, Dante simply handed the man his overcoat without a glance, his gaze sweeping the dining room once, assessing everything, dismissing everyone. The staff scrambled. Maria, another waitress, dropped a tray of water glasses in the kitchen, her hands shaking. "It's him," she whispered, grabbing a new set. "Don't stare. Lucia, for God's sake, don't stare." But Lucia did. She watched as they were seated in the secluded back booth, the one reserved for politicians and visiting celebrities. She watched as the other diners nervously avoided looking in their direction. She watched the display of fear, the groveling, the instant shift in power, and she hated it. It was the same sick dynamic she'd seen her whole life. Bullies and victims. She had sworn she would never be a victim again. She was assigned the section. Of course she was. Marco was too terrified to serve him, and she was the least likely to faint. Just take their order. Lucia, whatever they want, the answer is yes. If they insult you, smile and apologize. Marco hissed. Pushing her forward, Lucia squared her shoulders, picked up her notepad, and walked over. The two bodyguards sat facing the room. The lawyer sat opposite Dante. Dante himself had taken the seat against the wall, a position of tactical advantage. He wasn't eating. He was just sitting there, hands laced on the table, watching the room. "Good evening. Can I get you started with something to drink?" Lucia's voice was flat. Professional. The lawyer ordered a bottle of Barolo. The bodyguards wanted water. Dante said nothing. Lucia's eyes met his for a fraction of a second. They were dark, almost black, and shockingly intelligent. It felt like being assessed by a hawk. She looked away, turning her attention to the lawyer. "Will you be ordering appetizers?" The meal was tense. The men spoke in low voices, and not in English. Lucia moved in and out, refilling water, delivering bread, placing plates. She did not smile. She did not fawn. She did her job, exactly as she would for any other customer. She could feel Dante Morelli's eyes on her every time she approached the table. It wasn't a sexual gaze, not the slimy way other men looked at her. It was analytical, cold. He was watching her movements, the efficiency of her hands, the way she refused to meet his gaze for long. The tension peaked during the main course. The lawyer had ordered the ossobuco. Dante had ordered nothing but a single glass of whiskey, which he hadn't touched. As she refilled his water glass, he still hadn't touched it. His voice, low and smooth as velvet-wrapped steel, cut the silence. "You have a problem." It wasn't a question. Lucia froze, the water pitcher hovering. "Excuse me, sir? Your attitude," he said, his voice quiet, yet it carried to every man at his table. The bodyguards tensed. "You seem displeased to be serving us." Lucia set the pitcher down on her tray. Her heart was hammering, but her hands were steady. She could feel Marco watching from across the room, his face sheet white. She was supposed to apologize, to grovel, to simper, but she was tired. She was tired of her aching feet, tired of her empty apartment, and she was sick to death of men who thought they owned every room they walked into. She turned just slightly, enough that her back was mostly to him, and muttered it under her breath. She said it in the deep, guttural Sicilian her nonna used to use when the landlord raised the rent. It was an old-world curse, foul and specific, something she was sure a man this polished, this American-born, would never understand. "Ci ti pozzano caca in faccia Lassini. May a donkey sit on your face." The silence that followed was absolute. The lawyer's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The bodyguards looked, for the first time, confused. Then, the unthinkable happened. Dante Morelli smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was terrifying. It was the slow, amused, chilling smile of a wolf that had just watched a rabbit try to bite it. It lit his dark eyes with a cold fire. He leaned forward just an inch. The entire restaurant seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in that bubble of sudden, high-stakes danger. "Repeat that," he commanded, his voice still quiet, still smooth. Looking into my eyes, Lucia's blood turned to ice. He had understood her. He understood Sicilian. Every instinct from her past screamed at her. Run, apologize, flee. This was not a foster father she could outsmart. This was not a drunk customer she could ignore. This was Dante Morelli. He could have her fired. He could have her hurt. He could have her erased. But something else, something harder and more stubborn, rose up in her. It was the part of her that had survived, the part that refused to break. Slowly, she turned her head. She lifted her chin. She looked Dante Morelli directly in his cold, dark, terrifyingly amused eyes. The tension crackled. It was a physical thing, a pressure in the air. His intimidation, his sheer, crushing presence, met her nerve, her defiance. She was terrified, but she would be damned if she let him see it. Her gaze held. She didn't repeat the insult, but she didn't apologize for it either. After a long 10 seconds, his smile widened just a fraction. He nodded. Once, a short, sharp gesture. "Bring the check," he said to the lawyer. Lucia walked away. She didn't run. Her legs felt like hollow tubes, but she walked. She went into the kitchen, printed the bill, and stood against the stainless steel wall, breathing. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. "What happened?" Maria whispered. He didn't like my attitude," Lucia whispered back, her voice hoarse. She waited until they were gone. The heavy oak doors closed behind them, and the entire restaurant took a collective breath. Marco looked like he was going to weep with relief. Lucia went to clear the table. The bill was settled, paid in cash by the lawyer, and under Dante's untouched whiskey glass, there was a stack of money. She counted it. 5 $100 bills, a $500 tip. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't a tip. It was a message. Beneath the money, there was a heavy linen napkin, folded once. She picked it up. Written on it in sharp, black ink was a single sentence. "You're either brave or stupid. I'm watching." She crumpled the napkin in her fist, her fear replaced by a sudden, hot spike of anger. He wasn't just a bully. He was a stalker. She finished her shift at 2 a.m, her body vibrating with a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. The $500 felt dirty in her pocket. She refused Marco's offer to call her a cab. She couldn't spare the money, not even his money. The walk was 20 minutes, and she needed the cold air to clear her head. The streets of Briar Point were dark and empty at this hour, slick with a recent drizzle. Lucia walked fast, keys laced between her fingers, a habit she'd had since she was 16. She was halfway home when she heard it. Not footsteps, but the low, idling crunch of tires on wet pavement. She glanced over her shoulder. A dark sedan, a generic model, was cruising slowly about 30 feet behind her. Its headlights were dimmed. Lucia's heart leaped into her throat. She crossed the street. The sedan crossed with her. "I'm watching." Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her system. This wasn't a coincidence. She started walking faster, her boots slipping on the slick sidewalk. The car sped up, matching her pace. She was still 3 blocks from her apartment. She made a split-second decision. She ducked right into a narrow alleyway between a pizzeria and a defunct laundromat. It was a shortcut she sometimes took during the day, but never at night. She ran. The alley smelled of stale beer and garbage. Her footsteps echoed off the high brick walls. Behind her, she heard a car door slam. Footsteps, heavy ones. "Hey, wait!" a man's voice called out. She didn't look back. She pushed harder, her lungs burning. She knew this alley halfway down. There was a rusted-out gate that led to a small, enclosed courtyard behind the laundromat. She slammed her shoulder into the gate. It shrieked but gave way. She scrambled behind a massive, overflowing dumpster, crouching low, trying to control her breathing. She was trapped. She heard the man enter the courtyard. He was breathing heavily. Shit! Where'd she go? She held her breath, pressing herself against the damp, cold brick. She watched his shadow move in the faint light from the street. He paused, looking around, then kicked an empty bottle in frustration. He wasn't one of the men from the restaurant. This man was burly, dressed in a hoodie, after what felt like an eternity. He cursed again and jogged back out toward the alley entrance. Lucia waited, counting to 500, before she dared to move. She stayed in the shadows, taking the long way home, checking over her shoulder every 10 seconds. When she finally got to her studio, she locked the deadbolt, the chain, and the extra bolt she'd installed herself. She leaned against the door, sliding down to the floor, her entire body shaking. Who was that? A random mugger? Or was it connected to Dante? Was this a test, a punishment? She didn't sleep. The next day, she went to the diner, her eyes gritty and sore. Every customer who looked at her too long made her jump. She spilled coffee, dropped a plate. She was a mess. She dreaded going to Il Corvo. She dreaded the walk. She thought about calling in sick, but she couldn't afford to lose the job. She arrived at 4:50, 10 minutes early for her 5 o'clock shift. She went through the staff entrance in the back alley, the same alley she'd fled from the night before, just on a different street. She was pulling her apron from her locker when a shadow fell over her. She looked up. Dante Morelli was standing in the hallway of the staff kitchen, blocking her exit. He was alone. He was still in a suit, this one a dark charcoal gray, and he looked as cold and out of place in the cramped, fluorescent-lit hallway as a panther in a cage. Lucia's breath caught. "What are you doing here? You can't be back here." He ignored her. He didn't smile this time. His dark eyes were intense, focused. He took one step closer, invading her space, forcing her back against the lockers. He saw everything, she thought. The realization hitting her like a physical blow, the sedan, the chase, the alley. He hadn't sent the man. He had been watching the man. Who was driving the sedan? He demanded. His voice was not a request. It was an order for information. The one last night. Describe him. Who was driving the sedan? Lucia flinched, her back hitting the cold metal of the staff lockers. Dante Morelli's presence swallowed the small, sterile hallway. He was alone, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had brought his guards. "I don't know what you're talking about." She lied, her voice tight. "Last night," he said, his voice impatient, cutting through her defense. "You ran into the alley off Mulberry. He followed you into the courtyard. Describe him." He had seen it. He had been there, watching. The realization made her skin crawl. "Why? So you can send him a fruit basket?" A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "He was clumsy. He was not one of mine. Describe him." She held his gaze, her mind racing. This man was a disease, inserting himself into her life, turning it upside down. But the memory of the heavy footsteps in the dark alley, the cold panic. He was big, she admitted, hating the tremor in her voice. Burly. Wearing a dark hoodie, taller than you. That's all I saw. Dante nodded. Once. He pulled a sleek, dark phone from his suit jacket. He didn't dial, just touched the screen. It rang once. "Silas," he said, his voice low. "Dark sedan, nondescript. Possibly a rental. Driver was burly, hoodie, amateur. He was tailing an asset near Il Corvo last night. Find him. Find out who he's working for. And Silas, handle it." He hung up. He didn't ask her anything else. He slid the phone back into his pocket and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You're late for your shift." He turned and walked away, disappearing through the kitchen door before she could even process the cold efficiency of the order. She leaned against the lockers, her anger warring with a dizzying, unwanted sense of relief. He had handled it. Lucia Romano resented his intrusion. She despised his assumption that he had any right to interfere in her life, to call her an asset, to give orders that would likely end a man's life. But as she tied her apron on, her hands, which had been shaking, were suddenly steady. For the first time in her life, she felt the bizarre, suffocating sensation of being watched over by something far more dangerous than anything that hunted her. 3 days passed. She heard nothing. The confrontation in the hallway felt like a bizarre fever dream. She worked her diner shift, slept her few hours, and went to Il Corvo, jumpy and irritable. On Thursday, during the lunch rush at the Morning Glory, the bell over the diner door jingled. Lucia was balancing 3 plates of eggs and bacon on one arm. "Be right with you," she called out, sliding the plates in front of 3 truckers. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron, and froze. Dante Morelli was sitting at her counter, in the booth closest to the door. He looked utterly alien in the greasy spoon. His $1,000 charcoal suit was a stark contrast to the cracked vinyl seats and the formica countertop. He was watching her, his hands resting lightly on the counter, the usual din of the diner, the clatter of plates, the sizzle of the grill, the loud arguments over sports, seemed to hush. Even Sal, the cook, was staring. She grabbed the coffee pot, her jaw tight, and marched over. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low. "Coffee. Black." She slammed the mug down and poured, sloshing a little onto the counter. This isn't your kind of place." "I was curious," he said, ignoring her tone. He didn't touch the coffee. He just watched her. She tried to ignore him. She took other orders, refilled other coffees, ran the cash register. But she could feel his eyes on her, a physical weight on her back. He sat there for a full hour, nursing the 1 cup of coffee, saying nothing. The tension made her want to scream. Finally, she marched back over, holding the pot like a weapon. "Are you going to order food or just sit there and scare off my regulars?" "They're not scared," he observed, his gaze flicking to the truckers, who were now pointedly ignoring them. "They're intimidated. There's a difference." He leaned forward, just slightly. He was a low-level enforcer for the Rinaldi crew, an idiot. He won't be bothering you again. Her stomach dropped. "What did you do?" "I asked him who paid him. He told me. Then I made sure he understood that you were off limits." "Off limits," she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Like I'm a piece of property? Like you're a complication I'm managing." "You are a stalker," she said, her voice shaking with repressed fury. "You enjoy this, don't you? Following me. Watching me work in this dump, knowing what happened to that man." He smiled, that same cold, terrifying smile from the restaurant. "A stalker watches. Lucia, I protect. There's a difference." He sipped the coffee and grimaced slightly. "You shouldn't work 2 jobs. It makes you careless. You didn't even check the alley when you left last night. You don't know anything about my life. I know you have the voice of a lion," he said, his eyes suddenly intense, "but you live like a mouse, hiding in holes." He stood up, the sudden movement making her flinch. He placed a $20 bill on the counter for the $2 coffee. "It's a contradiction, and I don't like contradictions." He walked out, the bell jingling his departure, leaving the entire diner in stunned silence. Lucia avoided him for a week. She took a different route home from Il Corvo, her heart pounding the entire way. She hated him for making her scared, and she hated him even more for being the only thing that made her feel safe. One night, after a brutal double shift, she walked out of the back entrance of Il Corvo. It was almost 2 a.m, and the air was cold and damp. A black, sleek sedan was idling at the curb. It wasn't a taxi. It was low, expensive, and silent. The passenger window lowered. Dante was at the wheel. "Get in, Lucia," he said. It wasn't a request. She froze. "No, it's not safe to walk home at this hour." "It's safer than being in a car with you," she retorted, pulling her thin jacket tighter. She turned and began walking, fast, her boots clicking loudly on the empty pavement. She fully expected the car to cruise beside her, to harass her. She expected him to get out and force her. He didn't. The car just sat there, idling at the curb, until she turned the corner. She didn't look back. She walked the entire 20 minutes to her apartment, her keys gripped between her fingers, jumping at every shadow. But nothing happened. She got to her studio, her defiance warring with a cold dread. She felt a stupid surge of victory. "See? I don't need you." She bolted her 3 locks, made a cup of tea, and tried to unwind. But the silence of her apartment, usually her sanctuary, felt thin. She showered and changed into sweats, her exhaustion finally hitting her. It was nearly 4 a.m. when she heard it, a sound at her door, a faint, metallic scrape. She went rigid. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a poorly lit hallway. She held her breath, listening. Scrape. Click. Someone was picking her first lock. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She backed away from the door, grabbing the heaviest knife from the wooden block in her tiny kitchen. Her hands were slick with sweat. Click. The second lock. She heard a faint pressure against the door. They were testing the chain. A heavy thud as a shoulder slammed against the wood. The door frame groaned. Lucia stifled a scream, raising the knife. Another thud, harder this time. Then, a different sound from the hallway. A muffled thwack, a grunt, the sound of something heavy, a body, slumping against the wall. Silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. Lucia was hyperventilating, pressed against her kitchen counter, the knife shaking in her grip. A low, firm knock on her door. "Lucia!" Her heart stopped. It was his voice. "Open the door. "It's Dante." She crept forward, her legs like water. She looked through the peephole. He was there, standing in the dingy hallway. She fumbled with the chain, her fingers clumsy. She unlocked the deadbolts and pulled the door open. He was standing there, a black pistol in his hand, held low, pointed at the floor. It was fitted with a suppressor. Behind him, slumped against the opposite wall, was a man in dark clothes, a mask pulled up on his head. He was breathing, but he was unconscious. Dante looked past her, into her tiny, shabby studio. His eyes took in her bare feet, her old sweatpants, and the cheap knife she was holding. His expression was cold, but his eyes were black with a controlled, violent fury. "You have 5 minutes," he said, pushing past her into the room. He walked to her closet and pulled out her only duffel bag, tossing it on the bed. "Pack." "What? Who is that?" she stammered, pointing the knife at the man in the hall. "Did you shoot him?" "I hit him," Dante corrected, his voice flat. "He's not dead. He's the second one they sent. The first one is in the stairwell. Now pack." "I'm not going anywhere with you," she yelled, finding her voice. "You can't just come in here and—" He turned on her, moving so fast she didn't have time to react. He didn't touch her, but he invaded her space, forcing her back against the wall. "They know where you live. They know where you work. You refused my protection," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "Now you will accept it. You have 4 minutes." He was right. She was shaking too hard to argue. She was terrified. She shoved clothes into the bag, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. He grabbed her arm, pulled her out of the apartment, and didn't look back at the men in the hallway. The ride to his penthouse was silent. She stared out the window, watching Briarpoint blur by, her mind numb. He drove with a controlled, dangerous grace. His penthouse was another world. It was a massive, empty space of glass, steel, and white marble. Looking down on the city from what felt like the sky, it was sterile, beautiful, and utterly cold. He took her bag and dropped it on the pristine white marble floor. Her cheap canvas duffel looked like a piece of trash in a museum. Dante went to a sleek dark bar and poured 2 glasses of dark red wine, his back to her. He turned and held one out. "Drink," he said. "You're in shock." That was when she broke. She slapped the glass from his hand. It shattered on the floor, red wine splashing across the white stone like blood. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. "Stop ordering me around. Stop handling things. I am not your responsibility. I am not your asset." He didn't flinch. He just looked at the mess on his floor. Then he looked at her. He moved, and in 2 long strides, he had her. He backed her against the floor-to-ceiling window, the lights of the city glittering thousands of feet below them. He wasn't violent, but he was overwhelming. He planted his hands on the glass on either side of her head, caging her in. His body was inches from hers, radiating heat and the faint, expensive scent of his suit. "Say it again in Sicilian." He dared her, his voice a low, challenging rumble. She was trapped. Adrenaline, fear, and a strange, dizzying awareness of his closeness flooded her senses. She was terrified of him, and she was furious, and her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break. She lifted her chin, her eyes blazing into his. "Figliu di una puttana," she snarled. Dante stared at her for a long second. Then he laughed. It was not a smile. It was a real, deep laugh that vibrated through his chest, a sound so unexpected it shocked her into silence. The laugh faded, but the amusement remained in his eyes. The tension in the air changed. It was no longer just anger. It was something else, something thick and heavy. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth. She wasn't breathing. He leaned in, slowly, just a fraction. His lips were barely an inch from hers. She saw the intent in his eyes. "No." She shoved his chest, hard. He didn't stumble, but he allowed her to break the proximity. She scrambled back, away from the window, her chest heaving as she dragged in air. Dante straightened up, the moment broken. His expression was unreadable, his face a mask of cold control once more. "The guest room is the first door on the left," he said, his voice flat, as if nothing had happened. Lock the door." She grabbed her duffel bag from the floor and fled down the hall. She slammed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, her entire body shaking. The room was vast, with a bed bigger than her entire studio. She didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the silk-covered bed, listening to the profound, unsettling silence of the penthouse, waiting for morning. The sun was just beginning to stream through the massive windows when she finally unlocked her door. She crept into the main room. Dante was in the kitchen, still in yesterday's suit, though the jacket was off and his white shirt sleeves were rolled up his forearms, revealing strong, veined wrists. He was making coffee in a complex silver machine. He looked as if he hadn't slept at all. The couch he had apparently used was undisturbed. "Coffee?" he asked, not looking at her. "I want to go home," she said, her voice hoarse. "You don't have a home," he replied. Placing a mug on the marble island, he slid a thick manila folder across the counter toward her. She looked at it, confused. "Open it." She did. The first thing she saw was a grainy photograph of a run-down, imposing brick building. "The Briarpoint Annex for Children," Dante said, his voice void of emotion. Lucia's blood ran cold. "You were there for 6 years," he continued, pouring himself a coffee. "Your name isn't Lucy. It's Lucia. Lucia Romano. You ran away when you were 16, just before the state shut the place down." She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. He finally turned to look at her, his dark eyes flat and penetrating. "You were assigned to foster guardian Vincent Marzio." Lucia's vision tunneled. That name hit her like a physical blow, stealing all the air from her lungs. The man who haunted her nightmares, the one she had run from 8 years ago. She stared at Dante, her defiance gone, replaced by a pure, cold dread she hadn't felt since she was a teenager. Vincent Marzio, the name, spoken aloud in the sterile quiet of Dante Morelli's penthouse, was a physical blow. Lucia gripped the edge of the marble island, her knuckles white, her vision swimming. The smell of rich, dark coffee faded, replaced instantly by the scent of industrial-strength bleach, ammonia, and the faint, sweet-sour odor of stale cigarette smoke. She was 16 again. She was back in the Briarpoint Annex for Children, a gray, joyless building that smelled of despair. Vincent Marzio had been her assigned guardian for her final year, a man with a perpetually damp smile and eyes that lingered too long. He called all the girls his little birds. He was a man who held the power of their meager allowances, their weekend privileges, and their very futures in his soft, pale hands. Lucia had been defiant. She had been old enough to see the way he looked at the younger girls, the way he separated the pretty ones for special chores. She'd been pretty, and her defiance, her refusal to simper, had been a challenge he'd seemed to enjoy. The memory, the one she kept buried under 8 years of cement, broke through the surface. The laundry room in the annex basement, the humid air, the rattling of the ancient dryers. He had cornered her, his cheap cologne thick in her throat. He told her she was special. He told her she had a fire he admired. He told her he could arrange for a real family to take her in. A good one, if she would just be nice. His hand on her arm, his wet mouth moving closer. Lucia's breath hitched in the present. She had grabbed the heavy iron skillet from the cooling rack. She hadn't hit him, but she had raised it, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She had screamed a string of curses so foul it had shocked even him. The surprise on his face had hardened into a cold, reptilian rage. She hadn't waited for him to recover. She had dropped the skillet and run. She'd climbed out the laundry room window and into the rain. She had run for 3 days, sleeping in alleys, before she found a bus station and disappeared. "Lucia." Dante's voice pulled her back to the penthouse. She was hyperventilating, her entire body shaking. The coffee mug was rattling in its saucer. "He's back in town," Dante said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but his eyes were black and intense. "The men who tried to break into your apartment were low-level traffickers. They work for a man who works for Vincent. It seems he's expanded his operations. He's been moving girls through the Briarpoint docks for over a year." He paused, letting the information sink in. "He's on my list. Good, Lucia whispered, her voice raw. The panic was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp spike of ice. Where is he? Dante looked at her, his expression unreadable. You will stay here. You will not go to the diner. You will not go to the trattoria. Silas will arrange to have your things moved from your apartment. You are safe here. I will handle Vincent. It was an order. It was a dismissal. He was protecting her, but he was also caging her. No. Dante raised an eyebrow. This isn't a discussion. You have no idea what he's capable of. You don't know the men he's dealing with. No, she said again, louder this time. She pushed away from the counter, her fear eclipsed by a sudden, blinding rage. You don't get to handle him. You don't get to hunt him down while I sit here in your glass tower like some pet you've rescued. You are not a pet. You are a civilian, Dante countered, his voice hardening. This is my world, Lucia, not yours. You are in over your head. It is my world, she shouted, the sound echoing in the massive, empty room. He tried to assault me. The night I ran away, he tried. The admission hung in the air, tasting like poison. I got away, but I've been running ever since. You think I am going to hide now? When he's finally within reach? I am not that 16-year-old girl anymore. I am aware of that, he said, his voice dangerously low. Which is why you will do as I say. You will stay hidden. Or what? She challenged, stepping toward him. You'll lock the door? You'll hit me? Is that what you do, Dante? You force people to be safe? The accusation hit its mark. He moved, closing the distance between them, his face a mask of cold fury. You will not defy me on this. You will not put yourself at risk. You don't own me, she yelled, shoving his chest. It was like shoving a marble statue. You can't control me. I hate you. I hate what you are, and I hate you for dragging him back into my life. She was screaming now, fueled by 8 years of buried terror and the fresh humiliation of her own helplessness. She was crying, hot, angry tears she hadn't shed in years. Dante didn't shout back. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip powerful, stopping her next shove. His eyes, black and turbulent, bored into hers. The air between them was electric, thick with her rage and his immovable, absolute control. And then he broke. He didn't speak. He just hauled her in and crashed his mouth down on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was raw, bruising, and desperate. It was an answer to her rage, a claiming, an attempt to silence the storm in her, or perhaps to match it. His grip on her shoulders tightened, pulling her flush against his hard chest. His lips were demanding, angry, and she tasted the wine from the night before, and something dark and male and uniquely him. It was too much. It was a violation of her control, her space, her very self. With a choked sob of fury, Lucia ripped her mouth away and slapped him. The sound was sharp and loud, echoing off the marble. It cracked across the silence, stunning them both. His head snapped to the side from the force of it. She used his shock to bolt. She twisted out of his grip and tried to run, to get back to the guest room, to put a locked door between them. She only made it 2 steps. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers wrapping around it like a steel manacle. It wasn't violent, but it was absolute. It was a stop. Don't, he growled, his voice a low vibration. Don't run from me again. She struggled, pulling against his grip. But it was useless. He held her fast, slowly. He reeled her back in. She was trembling from head to toe, her chest heaving. When she was in front of him again, his grip on her wrist softened, but didn't release. His other hand came up, not in anger, but with a strange, hesitant gentleness. His thumb brushed the damp track of a tear on her cheek, his eyes tracing the red mark she had left on his face. He looked at her, and the anger was gone, replaced by something raw and unsettling. He was looking at her as if she were the first real thing he had seen in a very long time. He leaned in again. This time, it was slow. It was a question. She was trembling, her heart hammering, but she didn't pull away. She was trapped by his gaze, by the electric current his touch sent up her arm. His lips met hers again. This kiss was the opposite of the first. It was slow, hesitant, impossibly deep. It was a discovery. His hand left her wrist and slid to her waist, pulling her closer, not with force, but with an invitation. Her free hand came up, her fingers splaying on the hard plane of his chest, feeling his heart thump a heavy, steady rhythm beneath her palm. It was a kiss charged with unspoken emotions, with loneliness, with shared damage. It was the unraveling of two people who had built fortresses around themselves, and in that moment, the walls were crumbling. He was the one to break it. Dante pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed. His breathing was unsteady. When he spoke, his voice was rough, choked with a guilt that seemed to radiate from him. "You don't want to be owned by someone like me. Lucia." She opened her eyes, her breath catching. She looked at this powerful, terrifying man, this mafia boss, and saw, for the first time, the fractures in his armor. He looked broken. "Then protect me," she whispered, her voice shaking but firm. "Don't possess me." His head came up. He looked at her, truly looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He seemed to find an answer there. He let her go and stepped back, putting space between them. He walked to the massive wall of glass, turning his back to her, staring down at the city lights. "He's on my list," Dante said, his voice flat. "Because of my sister." Lucia froze. "Your sister?" "Elena. She was 17, younger than me." He spoke to the glass, his reflection a dark shadow against the morning sky. "She was reckless. She ran away from home. She thought our father's world was exciting, but she didn't understand the rules. She got mixed up with a modeling scout in Atlantic City." His fists clenched at his sides. It was Vincent Marzio's ring. He was just getting started then, moving girls up from the south. By the time I found her, 3 months later, she wasn't Elena anymore. They had broken her. He was silent for a long time. Lucia didn't dare breathe. "She killed herself 2 weeks after I brought her home," he said, his voice void of all emotion. "My father was weak. He was content with gambling and his loan sharking. He wanted to mourn. I wanted revenge. I took over the family. I dismantled his operations and built something harder, something stronger. I have been hunting Marzio's network ever since. I don't want power. Lucia, I want to burn his entire world to the ground. That is the only reason I am who I am." The confession settled in the room, heavy and cold. Now she understood. The coldness, the control, the silence. It wasn't about power, it was about a trauma as deep as her own. She walked slowly, stopping just behind him. "So let me help you." He turned, his face a mask. "How?" "There's a fundraiser," she said, her mind racing, connecting the dots from the file he'd left on the counter. "The Children's Hope Gala, this Saturday. He'll be there, won't he? Playing the philanthropist." Dante's eyes narrowed. "You read my file. He won't recognize me." She pressed on, ignoring him. "It's been 8 years. Dante, I'm not a scared kid. I'm not his little bird anymore. I'll be your date. I'm the bait. Absolutely not." "He'll be watching you," she argued, her voice gaining strength. "He'll be watching your men, but he won't be watching me. He likes new faces. He likes pretty, defiant girls. You said it yourself. If he recognizes you—" "He won't," she insisted, her gaze locking with his. "Not until I want him to." He studied her, the calculation returning to his eyes. He saw the fire in her, the same fire he'd seen in the restaurant, the same fire that had survived Vincent Marzio. He saw his perfect, unwitting weapon. "You will not leave my side," he said, his voice final. "Unless you tell me to," she countered. A dark alliance was formed. The next 2 days were a blur of tension. On Saturday night, the penthouse was silent. Lucia stood in front of a floor-length mirror in the guest room. She was unrecognizable. Dante had provided the dress. It was a column of sapphire blue silk that left her shoulders and back bare, clinging to her body in a way that was both elegant and intensely alluring. Her dark hair had been swept up. Her makeup was flawless. Smoky eyes, a neutral lip. She looked expensive. She looked untouchable. She looked like one of them. She heard him enter the room and turned. He was in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He stopped, his gaze sweeping over her, appreciative but heavy. You look. He paused, searching for the word. Stunning. I look like a lure, she said, her voice flat. You are. He walked toward her. All business. His face was cold, focused. We will have 6 men inside, 2 at the main entrance, 2 on the floor. Silas will be with me. You will not, under any circumstances, leave my side unless I give you a direct order. Is that clear? Yes. Marzio will be there. He'll want to talk to me. He'll be curious about you. Dante's jaw clenched. He likes new faces. What if he approaches me when you're not there? What if I go to the bar or the powder room? You won't. I have to. If I'm going to be believable bait, Dante. He scowled, knowing she was right. If you are in trouble, if he touches you, if you feel anything, the slightest thing, is wrong, you signal. How? He stepped closer, his presence enveloping her. He reached out, his long, strong fingers brushing the bare skin of her collarbone. His touch was electric, a stark contrast to the violence of their first kiss. Tap here, he murmured, his thumb grazing the hollow of her throat. Twice. My men will see it, I will see it, and we will pull you out. Consequences be damned. She nodded, her throat dry, her skin tingling where he'd touched her. He didn't move his hand. His gaze was locked on hers in the mirror. He seemed to be seeing both the woman in the blue dress and the 16-year-old girl who had run for her life. The strap, he said, his voice suddenly thick. It's crooked. Before she could react, he moved behind her. She watched his reflection as his hands settled on her bare shoulders. His knuckles grazed the side of her breast as he carefully adjusted the thin silk strap. It was a simple, clinical movement, but it felt agonizingly intimate. She shivered. His hands lingered for a moment, his thumbs brushing her shoulder blades, a silent, possessive, and protective gesture. Lucia, he said, his voice low, right by her ear, you don't have to do this. I can handle him. She met his dark eyes in the mirror. Yes, Dante, she whispered. I do. The ballroom of the Briarpoint Grand Hotel was a sea of manufactured sincerity. Crystal chandeliers, heavy as constellations, dripped light onto men in tuxedos and women in jewel-toned armor. The air hummed with forced laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes, a symphony of polite, predatory ambition. Lucia Romano was a sapphire slash in the center of it all. She was playing a role. The dress, the hair, the diamonds at her throat, all of it was a costume. She was Dante Morelli's beautiful, silent, and new acquisition. She kept her back straight, her expression pleasantly blank, and her hand resting lightly on Dante's arm. Her entire being was focused on the part, a performance of a lifetime. Dante was magnificent in this setting. He was not just a guest, he was the center of gravity. Men angled toward him, their smiles eager. Women watched him from behind their glasses, their expressions a mixture of fear and desire. He navigated the room with a cold, aristocratic grace, a dark king in his court, and he never, ever took his eyes off her. His gaze was a physical tether. While he nodded at a city councilman or exchanged a flat, toneless word with a rival, his attention was on her. He watched her reflection in the mirrored pillars. He watched her when she sipped her water. He watched her breathe. It was possessive, suffocating, and at that moment, it was the only thing keeping her upright. Then, at precisely 9 o'clock, Vincent Marzio arrived. He was older. 8 years had carved deeper lines around his mouth and added a distinguished gray to his temples. He was heavier, softer, encased in a tuxedo that was clearly custom-made and excruciatingly expensive. He was the picture of a philanthropist, a man who cared about the city's children. But his eyes, as they swept the room, were the same. They were the dead. Reptilian eyes she remembered from the laundry room. They were the eyes of a man who saw the world as a collection of things to be used. He didn't recognize her. She was just a beautiful woman on the arm of a powerful man. He clocked her, his eyes doing a quick, appreciative, and dismissive scan, and then he turned his attention to Dante. "Dante," Marzio said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone as he approached, his hand extended. "A pleasure to see you supporting such a worthy cause." Dante did not take his hand. Marzio. An awkward silence stretched. Vincent's smile faltered, but he recovered, turning his oily charm on Lucia. "And you are—" "This is Lucia," Dante said, his voice flat, cutting off any further inquiry. His hand settled on the small of her back. "A warning, a claiming, a pleasure," Vincent said, his eyes lingering on her bare shoulders. They were interrupted by another councilman, a man on Vincent's payroll. He pulled Dante aside, insisting on a word about a new dock zoning ordinance. It was the moment they had anticipated. "Excuse me," Dante murmured, his eyes holding Lucia's for a fraction of a second. "Be careful." He was 10 feet away, trapped in a conversation, but his body was angled toward her. Lucia took a small, shaky breath. This was it. She turned as if to find a waiter and accidentally brushed against Vincent Marzio's arm. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice a soft, smoky imitation of the women around her. Vincent turned, his smile instant. "No apology necessary. In fact, I'd say it's my good fortune." Lucia gave him a small, shy smile. "You're Mr. Marzio. You're the one who put all this together. I just do my part for the children," he said, puffing up. "And you, Lucia, that's a beautiful name. Are you from the old country?" "My family was," she lied, lowering her gaze, playing the part of the demure, impressed girl. "It's all so overwhelming. I've never been to a party this grand. It's a lot to take in," he said, stepping closer, invading her space. "Especially when you're the most stunning woman in the room, Morelli. He's a very lucky man, but he seems a bit cold for a woman with such fire in her eyes." He was flirting, the same way he had flirted with her when she was 16, the same patronizing, predatory charm. Bile rose in her throat, hot and acidic. She wanted to claw his eyes out. Instead, she smiled. "He's very protective," she said. "Protective? Is that what they're calling it?" Vincent laughed. "A beautiful, bright bird like you shouldn't be kept in a cage. Lucia, even a gilded one." Across the small clearing, Dante's conversation with the councilman had ended. He was standing alone, watching. His fists were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. He was a statue carved from rage. He saw the way Vincent was leaning in, the way his smile was too familiar. Vincent, emboldened by her lack of protest, grew bolder. He placed his hand on her bare arm, just above the elbow. His thumb began to stroke her skin, a slow, proprietary gesture. "A woman like you," he murmured, his voice dropping, "shouldn't be wasted on a man like Dante Morelli. He may own this city, but he doesn't know what to do with real beauty." The touch. It was a brand. It was the same clammy, awful touch from the laundry room. The smell of bleach and old cigarettes filled her senses. The ballroom, the music, the lights, it all vanished. She was 16, trapped and terrified. "He's touching me." Dante saw it. He saw the touch, and he saw the flicker of sheer, unadulterated panic in her eyes. He forgot the plan. He forgot the trial. He forgot everything but the primal, male need to kill the man who was putting that look on her face. He took one step forward, his mask of cold control shattering, his face contorting with a murderous fury. Silas, his second, put a hand on his chest. "Boss, no. Wait for the signal." But Lucia was already moving. The panic was real, but the warrior in her took over. Her left hand, the one he couldn't see, fluttered to the hollow of her throat, once, twice. The panic signal. It was as if a switch had been thrown. The room, which had been in motion, snapped into a new, terrifying focus. Dante was moving, not running, but walking with a speed that was predatory. Silas was a step behind him. The two Morelli men at the main entrance turned, no longer pretending to be guests, and began to move toward the center of the room. The other two men, who had been flanking the bar, did the same. Vincent Marzio was still smiling, oblivious. In fact, if you ever find yourself in need of a friend, "Get your hand off her!" Dante's voice was not a request. It was a low, deathly command that cut through the music. Vincent flinched, his head snapping up. His smile vanished. He saw Dante, and for the first time, he looked afraid. He saw the cold, black promise of violence in Morelli's eyes. "Morelli," he stammered, his hand dropping from Lucia's arm. "I was just making your lovely companion feel welcome." By now, the 4 other men had formed a loose, inescapable circle. The partygoers nearby had gone silent, sensing the shift in the air, the sudden, dangerous drop in temperature. The music still played, a grotesque counterpoint to the tension. "You're making a scene, Dante," Vincent hissed, trying to regain control. "Whatever you think you saw—" Lucia stepped out from behind Dante. The mask was gone. The seductive, silent woman had vanished. In her place was a survivor, her eyes burning with 8 years of condensed, purified rage. Her face was pale, but her chin was high. "Hello, Vincent," she said, her voice shaking but clear. He frowned, confused. He looked from her to Dante, then back. "Do I know you?" The question, the genuine lack of recognition, was the final insult. "You should," she said, her voice dropping, each word a chip of ice. "You called me your little bird. You told me you could find me a real family if I was nice. You cornered me in the laundry room of the Briarpoint Annex." Vincent's face went from confused to pale, to a sickly, grayish white. The blood drained from his face as if a plug had been pulled. His eyes widened. His jaw went slack. He recognized her. He saw the 16-year-old girl in the blue silk dress. "My name," she spat, "is Lucia Romano." Vincent looked like he was going to be sick. He looked at Dante, whose face was a mask of cold, satisfied judgment. He understood. In that single, horrifying instant that he had not just been caught, he had been hunted. "Silas," Dante said, his voice casual, as if ordering a drink. "Mr. Marzio is feeling unwell. He needs some air. See him to his car." "Of course. Boss." Silas and another man grabbed Vincent's arms in grips that were tight enough to break bone. "You can't do this," Vincent panted, his philanthropic facade crumbling to reveal the terrified rat beneath. "You can't. I have friends. Take him to the warehouse," Dante ordered, his voice flat. "Keep him clean. Don't mark him. He's not ours. He belongs to the district attorney. I want him to stand in a courtroom. I want him to face every girl he's ever hurt." They dragged him, stumbling toward a side exit, his protest dying in his throat. The ballroom was a vortex of whispers. Dante ignored them. He turned to Lucia. She was staring at the empty space where Vincent had been, her entire body vibrating like a plucked string. He gently, firmly, took her arm. "Let's go home." He walked her out the front door, past the stunned faces and the valets, and into the back of his waiting sedan. The ride to the penthouse was silent. Lucia stared out the window, unseeing. She was dissociated, floating, the adrenaline having hollowed her out. Dante sat beside her, not touching her, just a solid, dark presence in the car. They entered the penthouse. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the massive, silent room. That was the sound that broke her. The armor, the dress, the 8 years of survival. It all shattered. A sob tore its way out of her chest, a raw, ugly, animal sound. She stumbled toward the wall of glass, her knees buckling. The city lights blurred into 1,000 fractured stars as the tears she had refused to shed for almost a decade finally came. She didn't just cry, she broke down. She sank to the marble floor, her hands covering her face, and she grieved. She sobbed for the 16-year-old girl who had run in the rain. She sobbed for the fear, the anger, the violation. She sobbed for the relief of it finally being over. Dante stood by the door, watching her. He didn't move for a full minute, and he let her feel it. He let the poison out. His face was a mask of pain, not for himself, but for her. Then, slowly, he walked over to her. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't say, "It's okay." He didn't say anything. He just knelt in front of her, his expensive tuxedo pants creasing on the cold floor, and he opened his arms. It was the invitation she had been waiting for her entire life. She lurched forward, colliding with his chest, and buried her face in his jacket. She gripped the front of his shirt, her fists clenching the fabric as if she were drowning. She was gasping, hyperventilating, her body racked with tremors. Dante's arms wrapped around her, strong and sure, pulling her tightly against him. He held her. He just held her. He was a rock, an anchor in the storm that was ripping her apart. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers sinking into her elaborate hairstyle, holding her steady. After a long time, he stood, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her to the massive, modern couch, sat down and pulled her onto his lap, cradling her like a child. He held her all night. Lucia cried until there was nothing left but exhausted, shuddering breaths. She fell asleep against his chest, her ear pressed over his heart. The slow, steady thump-thump, the only sound in the dark. Silent room. He sat there, fully clothed, unmoving, his chin resting on the top of her head. He just held her, a silent, warm, steady guardian. Lucia woke to the thin gray light of early morning. She was on the couch, tucked under a heavy, impossibly soft cashmere throw blanket. Her head was pillowed on a cushion. Her body ached. Her eyes were swollen, but she felt empty. She felt clean. She sat up. Dante was not beside her. He was in the armchair across from her, still in his wrinkled, unbuttoned tuxedo. He had fallen asleep watching her, his head tilted back, his long legs stretched out, in sleep. His face was unguarded, all the coldness and control stripped away. He looked younger, exhausted, and strangely vulnerable. She stood, the blanket pooling at her feet. She looked at this man, this killer, this mafia boss, this complicated, broken man who had hunted her monster and then held her while she fell to pieces. A new, terrifying, and overwhelming emotion washed over her. It was not gratitude, though she was grateful. It was not just attraction, though she felt that too. It was a deep, resonant pull. He stirred, his instincts sensing her gaze. His eyes snapped open. They were not groggy. They were instantly alert, sharp, and focused. They found her. They stared at each other in the quiet morning light. Lucia walked toward him. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She just acted. She stopped in front of his chair. He watched her, his expression cautious, waiting. She leaned down, cupped his rough, unshaven jaw in her hands, and pressed her lips to his. It was a soft, hesitant kiss. It was a question. It was a thank you. It was an offering. For a second, he remained perfectly still, as if shocked. Then, a low sound rumbled in his chest, and he responded. His lips moved against hers, not with the anger of their first kiss, but with a deep, answering, and profound need. His hand came up, tangling in her messy, unpinned hair, holding her to him. The kiss deepened, and it was slow, and it was full of all the words they hadn't said. It was full of the trust they had earned in the darkness. He stood, pulling her up with him, never breaking the kiss. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her arms locking around his neck. He murmured her name, his voice rough with sleep and a raw emotion she had never heard from him. He carried her from the living room, not to the guest room, but to his own. The room was dark, the heavy curtains drawn against the city. He laid her on the massive bed, his movements slow, deliberate, almost worshipful. He moved over her, bracing his weight on his arms, and just looked at her, his dark eyes tracing her features as if memorizing her. He undressed her slowly, reverently. He unzipped the sapphire dress, pushing the silk from her shoulders. He kissed the skin of her arm where Vincent had touched her, a silent vow, a cleansing. His lips were soft, warm. She trembled, her hands coming up to trace the hard line of his jaw. This was not a collision. It was not a fire. It was a healing. It was two bruised, broken hearts touching, finding a fragile, impossible safety in each other's arms. He moved with a tenderness she never would have believed him capable of. He kissed her swollen eyelids, her tear-stained cheeks. She kissed the scar on his jaw. It was a slow, quiet, and profound coming together, a physical manifestation of the trust he had earned by holding her through the night. It was gentle, and it was deep, and it was exactly what they both needed. Afterward, they lay tangled in the heavy, expensive sheets. The morning light had begun to filter through the edges of the curtains. Lucia felt, for the first time in her entire life, completely and utterly safe. He was propped on one elbow, watching her, All the coldness, all the shadows were gone from his eyes. He just looked at her. He reached out, his thumb brushing a strand of damp hair from her temple. He murmured it in Sicilian, his voice a low, warm rumble that vibrated through her. Mia lionessa, my lioness. A fresh tear, this one of pure relief, slipped from the corner of her eye. She smiled, her voice thick. You finally said something sweet. The days that followed were a strange, suspended reality. The penthouse. Once a sterile glass cage had become a sanctuary. Lucia woke up in Dante's bed, tangled in his sheets, to the sight of the city waking up thousands of feet below. The fear that had lived in her stomach for 8 years was gone, replaced by a quiet, fragile warmth. He was not the man she had imagined. In private, the cold, calculating boss vanished. He was quiet, attentive, almost gentle. He would watch her, his dark eyes tracing her face while she read a book, as if she were a puzzle he was still solving. She learned the sound of his footsteps, the low rumble of his voice on the phone, the way he took his coffee. But the outside world was not their bedroom. The peace was thin. Dante's decision to hand Vincent Marzio over to the district attorney, rather than putting a bullet in his head in a dark alley, was a seismic event in their world. It was a breach of every code. Lucia would sit in the vast living room, trying to read, while Dante took calls in his study. The heavy door closed. His voice was never raised, but the tone that filtered through the wood was not the one he used with her. It was the cold, flat sound of command. It was the sound of a king placating his unruly court. One afternoon, she was waiting for him, pacing the marble floor, when the penthouse elevator opened. It wasn't Dante. It was Silas, his second in command, and 2 other men she didn't recognize. They were agitated. He's not here, Lucia said, pulling the cashmere robe tighter around her. Silas, usually the picture of calm, barely looked at her. He seemed to see her as a piece of furniture, a complication. He turned to the other men, his voice a low, furious hiss. The Rinaldi crew pulled their support. They said he's lost his nerve. The old man, Pietro, said the Morelli family is being run by a woman. It's true. The other man growled. He should have finished Marzio. Instead, he turns him over to the feds? It makes us all look weak. He's spending his time up here. Distracted. This whole organization is going soft. Silas shot a warning glance toward Lucia, but she had already heard it. He's weak now, because of a woman. The words hit her harder than a slap. The warmth she had felt evaporated, replaced by the familiar, cold dread of her past. She was not his sanctuary. She was his liability. She was the one who had asked him to be a different kind of man, to hand Marzio over, to use the law. She had made him vulnerable. She was the crack in his armor, the flaw that would get him killed. She backed away, into the kitchen, her heart hammering. They didn't even notice. They were too busy complaining about their boss's weakness, her weakness. She knew what she had to do. It was the only thing she had ever been good at. She ran. She waited until they were gone. She went to the guest room, where her old duffel bag was still tossed in the corner. She pulled on her jeans, her old boots, and the thin jacket she'd arrived in. She didn't take a single thing that belonged to him. She didn't take the clothes, the money, or the warmth. She couldn't. She scribbled a note, her hand shaking. I'm sorry. You're better off without me. She left it on the massive, empty bed they had shared. She walked to the private elevator, her stomach twisting. Her hand was on the call button, her escape just seconds away, when his voice froze her. Going somewhere? She turned. Dante was standing in the doorway of his study, which he had clearly entered from his private hallway. He wasn't wearing his jacket. His white shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his face was a mask of cold, unreadable calm. He hadn't seen the note. I was going for a walk. She lied, her voice thin. He looked at the duffel bag in her hand. A long walk. He walked toward her, slowly, deliberately. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't angry. He was something far worse. He was disappointed. After last night, he said, his voice quiet. After everything, you were just going to leave, like you did from the annex. No conversation, no goodbye. Just run. The accusation in his voice, the raw, personal hurt, broke her. "I heard your men," she cried, dropping the bag. "I heard Silas. They're calling you weak. Dante. They're saying I've made you soft, that you should have killed Marzio, that you've lost your nerve because of me." He stopped, his expression hardening. "And you believe them? You think I am that easily broken? It doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what they believe. This is your world, your rules. They're going to come for you because they think I'm your weakness, and they're right." She was yelling now, tears of frustration and terror streaming down her face. "I won't be the reason you get killed. I won't be your complication," he finally snapped. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and grabbed her arms, his fingers digging into her, not to hurt, but to anchor her. His face was inches from hers, his dark eyes blazing with a fury she hadn't seen since the fundraiser. "You think this is about them?" he snarled. "You think I give a damn what those old men whisper in their social clubs? Their time is over. This is my family. My rules." "You don't understand," she sobbed, struggling against his grip. But he was immovable. "You can't be this. You can't be the man who holds me all night and also be the man who rules this city. You have to choose. You're a mafia boss. You don't get to have a heart." The words hung in the air, echoing in the sterile, silent room. His grip on her arms tightened, his expression cracked, the fury vanished, replaced by a raw, agonizing vulnerability that stunned her into silence. "I never had one," he said, his voice a low, broken rasp. "I never had one. Not a real one. It was just a piece of machinery. It worked to keep me alive. That's all. Until you." He let go of her, his hands falling to his sides as if in defeat. He looked utterly wrecked. "Until you stood in that restaurant and cursed me to my face. Until you fought me. Until you trusted me." Lucia's breath hitched. She had no answer for that. "So, go," he said, stepping back, away from her, gesturing to the elevator. His face was a mask of ice again, but his eyes were haunted. "If you believe I'm that weak, if you think running is the answer, then run. Go back to your diners and your alleys. See how long you last without me." It was a test. It was a challenge. And it was a betrayal of its own. She stared at him, her heart breaking. He was right, and he was wrong. He was giving her the choice, but it wasn't a choice at all. She picked up her duffel bag. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. She pressed the button for the elevator. She stepped inside. The steel doors slid shut, sealing him away, and she descended from the sky, back to the street. The elevator doors opened onto the street. He let her leave. Just like that. She was free. The cold, wet air of Briar Point hit her, and it felt like a slap. She clutched her bag and started walking. With no destination in mind, she just walked, putting distance between herself and the penthouse. She walked for blocks, lost in a fog of her own misery. She had done the right thing. She had saved him. She had cut out the weakness. So why did it feel like she had just amputated a part of her own soul? She was so lost in her reflection, so focused on the ache in her chest, that she didn't notice the gray car that stayed exactly 2 blocks behind her, mirroring her every turn. And she didn't notice the black utility van parked in the alley until it was too late. She was crossing a quiet street, miles from the glitter of the penthouse, deep in the industrial heart of the city, when the van screeched out of the alley, blocking her path. 2 men in black masks jumped out. Lucia didn't freeze. She dropped her bag and ran. She was a fighter. She was a lioness, but she was on an open street. One man grabbed her, his arm locking around her waist, lifting her off the ground. She kicked, she screamed, she clawed, landing a sharp blow to his temple with her elbow. He grunted in pain but didn't let go. The second man grabbed her legs. They hauled her, fighting and screaming, into the back of the van and slammed the doors. The tires smoked as the van sped away. The gray car that had been tailing her slammed its brakes, did a 180, and began pursuit. The driver, one of Dante's most trusted men, was already on the phone, his voice grim. "She's taken." Dante was in a meeting. It was not a small meeting. He was in the private dining room of Il Corvo, sitting at the head of a long table with the 5 capos of the Morelli family. These were the old men, the ones who thought he was weak. Dante. One of them, Pietro, was saying, his voice placating, "All we are saying is that this business with Marzio, it was bad form. It shows a lack of respect for tradition. It makes us look—" Dante's phone, which was on the table, buzzed once. A single, specific vibration. It was the panic line. He didn't excuse himself. He didn't end the meeting. He stood up. The heavy oak chair he was sitting in screeched and toppled over, backward, crashing to the floor. Every man at the table froze. Dante's face was no longer cold. It was not calculating. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated, and terrifying rage. His eyes were black holes, promising death. "Dante?" Pietro asked. His bravado gone, his voice suddenly small. Dante didn't answer. He ripped the door of the dining room open and stormed out, his men falling in behind him. The capos were left staring at the empty, overturned chair, suddenly acutely aware of just how wrong they had been. Lucia was in a warehouse. It was cold, and it smelled of rust and fish. Her hands were tied behind her to a steel chair. Her duffel bag was on the floor, its meager contents spilled out. There were 3 of them, masked. They were associates of Vincent's, men whose operations had been destroyed by Dante's methodical hunt. "This is her," one of them said, kicking her boot. "The boss's little weakness." "She doesn't look like much," another said, circling her, "but she's what brought Marzio down. She's what's tearing the Morelli family apart." "Where is he?" Lucia spat, her voice shaking but defiant. "You took me. He'll find you. He will burn this place to the ground." The leader laughed. "That's the plan, sweetheart. We take the weakness, we draw the boss out, and when he comes for his little pet, we end him. He's not a king. He's just a man. And men who think with their hearts, they get sloppy." He took a step toward her, pulling a knife. "Now, we just have to make sure he's properly motivated." The massive, rolling steel door of the warehouse exploded inward. It wasn't an explosion. It was Dante's Escalade, which he had driven at 80 miles an hour straight through the locked gate. The van screeched to a halt in the middle of the warehouse, its headlights pinning the 3 men like terrified deer. Before the men could even raise their weapons, Dante was out of the truck. He was not the man from the penthouse. He was not the king from the meeting. He was a force of nature. He was death. He moved with a speed that was inhuman. He held a pistol, steady, in a 2-handed grip. The first man raised his gun. Pop, a single suppressed shot. The man dropped. The second man, the one with the knife, grabbed Lucia, trying to use her as a shield. Pop, the man stared, confused, at the red stain spreading on his thigh. He screamed and let her go, falling to the ground. The third man turned to run. Pop. He fell face first and did not move. It was over in less than 5 seconds. The warehouse was silent, save for the groan of the man on the floor and the ticking of the destroyed truck's engine. Dante stood in the high beams, his gun still raised, sweeping the dark corners of the warehouse. He was breathing heavily, his entire body rigid, a merciless statue of black-clad vengeance. He saw the room was clear. He holstered his weapon, and he walked toward her. Lucia was staring, her heart in her throat, unable to process the speed of the violence she had just witnessed. He stopped in front of her, his face dark in the shadows. He pulled a tactical knife from his boot and knelt to cut the zip ties on her wrists. And she saw it. His hands. They were shaking. They were not trembling slightly. They were shaking so violently he could barely guide the blade. It wasn't the aftermath of the fight. It was the terror, the raw, overwhelming fear of being too late. The man who had just executed 2 men without flinching, the cold boss of the Morelli family, was trembling because he had almost lost her. He finally sliced through the last tie. Her hands fell free. He didn't pull her up. He dropped the knife, and his shaking hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks, his eyes scanning her, desperate. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a rough, choked whisper. "Lucia, look at me. Did they hurt you?" She didn't answer. She just lifted her own hands and covered his, trapping his trembling fingers against her skin, finally understanding. "No," she whispered. "I'm not hurt. You came?" A sound, half sob, half groan, tore from his chest. He lunged forward, pulling her out of the chair and into his arms, burying his face in her hair. He crushed her against his chest, his entire body rigid with the aftershock of his fear, holding onto her as if she were the only thing keeping him from disintegrating into the darkness. When Lucia woke up, the first thing she registered was the smell of antiseptic and old wool. The light was not the sharp, sterile white of the penthouse, but a dim, dusty gold, filtering through a high, grimy window. She was on a narrow cot, tucked under a rough blanket. She was safe. She sat up, her body aching, but her mind was sharp. She was in a small office, Spartan and clean, in what felt like the back of the warehouse. Dante was sitting in a single wooden chair by the door, facing her. He hadn't moved. He hadn't left her side all night. He was still in his suit from the meeting, now rumpled and stained with grease. His face was pale with exhaustion, dark stubble shadowing his jaw. He was watching her, his expression a mixture of profound relief and a bone-deep weariness she had never seen. His hands were resting on his knees. His knuckles were raw, split open and caked with dried blood, not from the fight, from something else, from hitting something. A wall, an inanimate object, in a fit of rage or fear he couldn't unleash on a person. "Your hands," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. He glanced down at them, as if just noticing, and then dismissed them. "It's nothing. You were shaking," she said, the memory of his terror in the warehouse, the sheer, violent tremor in his grip, still sharper than the memory of the guns. "He put his hands on you," Dante said, his voice flat, but a muscle in his jaw jumped. "He was going to hurt you." Lucia swung her legs off the cot and stood, testing her balance. She walked over to him, her bare feet cold on the concrete floor. She knelt in front of him, taking his large, damaged hands in her own. She traced the split skin over his knuckles, her touch impossibly gentle. "This is chaos, Dante," she murmured, trying to find a joke, trying to lighten the crushing weight in the room. "You can't just keep driving your truck through buildings every time I go for a walk." He didn't smile. He just stared at her, his dark eyes intense, seeing something far beyond her attempt at humor. "You almost died," he said, his voice rough. "You walked out that elevator. You chose to leave, and you almost died. For me. Because you thought you were protecting me. I'd rather die fighting than live running," she said, her voice fierce, meeting his gaze. "I've been running my whole life. Dante, from men like Vincent, from the system, from myself. When I walked out that elevator, I was running again. But when those men grabbed me, I stopped. I knew you would come. I'd rather die with you, fighting, than live without you, hiding." He pulled his hands from her grasp, not to reject her, but to cup her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. His hands were still trembling, just slightly. "You will not die," he said, his voice a vow. "Not for me, not for anyone. I will not be the reason. Do you understand me? Lucia?" She leaned into his touch, covering his hands with hers. "You're not the reason. Dante, you're the one who stopped me from running." He pulled her forward, his forehead resting against hers. They stayed like that for a long time, two survivors in the quiet, dusty office, the war raging outside their small circle of peace. The war, it turned out, was just beginning. The trial of Vincent Marzio was a public spectacle. It was not a quiet backroom deal. It was a circus. Dante Morelli, the reclusive, untouchable head of the Briar Point underworld, had personally delivered a high-profile human trafficker to the district attorney. The city was in an uproar, but the star of the trial was Lucia Romano. She walked into that courtroom, not as a victim, but as a witness. She wore a simple, dark dress, her hair pulled back, her face scrubbed clean. She looked small, almost fragile, in the imposing, wood-paneled room. And then she spoke. She did not cry. She did not falter, with a voice that was clear, cold, and steady. She recounted her time at the annex. She described Vincent Marzio's special chores. She recounted, in precise, devastating detail, the incident in the laundry room. She held his gaze from the stand, her own eyes burning with the fire of a 16-year-old girl who had finally gotten her say. Her testimony was the first crack in the dam. The next day, 2 more women came forward, then 5. Within a week, the DA's office had a list of over 30 women, all with stories of Vincent Marzio, of the annex, of a system that had sold them. Vincent was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. Lucia was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She didn't cheer. She just closed her eyes and took her first, truly free breath. But they had won a battle, not the war. Dante's world was built on a precise, brutal code. You handled your own problems. You did not, under any circumstances, involve the law by turning Marzio over. Dante had not just broken the code, he had shattered it. To make matters worse, he called a meeting, not with his capos, with the press. He stood in the lobby of the Morelli corporate headquarters, an imposing tower of black glass flanked by Silas. He was the picture of a legitimate, powerful CEO. He read from a prepared statement. He announced that the Morelli family was divesting from all high-risk ventures. They were formally ending their interests in gambling, in loan sharking, in any enterprise that operated in the gray areas of the law. He was putting himself and his entire family at risk. He was swearing off the very violence-based rackets that had built his empire. He was, in effect, declaring his retirement from the mob. The syndicate revolted. The old families, the Rinaldis, the Falcones, and even some of his own capos like Pietro, saw it as the ultimate betrayal. He had gone legitimate. He had exposed them all, made them vulnerable. And he had done it. They whispered, for a woman. The truce that had held Briar Point together for a decade dissolved overnight. It culminated 3 weeks later. Lucia was at the penthouse. She was worried. Dante had been in meetings for 2 straight days, trying to negotiate a peaceful separation of his assets, trying to hand over territories without a bloodbath. He was trying to untangle himself without getting them both killed. He called her. "Stay in the penthouse. Lucia, lock the elevator. Do not, under any circumstances, come out until I come and get you. Do you understand?" "Dante, what's happening?" she pleaded, his cold, controlled voice terrifying her. "The Rinaldis are refusing the terms. They're making a play. I'm going to the warehouse to meet them. To finish this. Stay. Put—" The line went dead. She stared at the phone. He was going to meet them. The men who hated him. The men who thought he was weak. He was walking into a trap. She did not listen. She was his lioness. She would not hide while he was being slaughtered. She took the elevator down, took one of Dante's cars from the garage, and sped toward the industrial sector, her heart in her throat. She got there as the sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows over the warehouse district. She pulled up a block away, her heart pounding. The main warehouse, the one where he had rescued her, was dark. But the yard was filled with black sedans. It was an army. She crept through the shadows, slipping through a side door he had left unsecured on purpose, just in case. The warehouse was vast and filled with shadows. Dante was there. He was standing in the center of the concrete floor, under a single, bare bulb. He was not alone. Silas was with him, and 3 of his most loyal men. They were surrounded. Pietro, his old capo, stood opposite him, flanked by a dozen Rinaldi soldiers. "It's over, Dante," Pietro said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You had a good run, but you're weak. You put this whole city at risk for a piece of trash you picked up in a restaurant." Lucia, hiding behind a stack of shipping crates, put her hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. "She has nothing to do with this," Dante said, his voice calm, but his body was coiled. "Ready. This is about you. Pietro, you were always too stupid to see the future. The future is legitimate. The future is clean. You're just a relic. And you're a dead man." Pietro sneered. He gave a nod. The world exploded. Gunfire erupted from all sides. It was an ambush, a massacre. Dante and his men were hopelessly outnumbered. Dante and Silas moved as one, diving behind a concrete barrier, returning fire with disciplined, precise shots. Men were yelling, bullets were screaming, ricocheting off the steel beams. Lucia was terrified. She was trapped. She saw one of Dante's men go down, then another. "Dante!" she screamed, her voice lost in the chaos. He heard her. His head snapped in her direction. His eyes widened in sheer, abject terror. "Lucia, no! Get out!" His shout had given away his position. A Rinaldi gunman, positioned on a catwalk above, took aim, but he wasn't aiming at Dante. He was aiming at her. He was aiming at the weakness. Lucia saw the man. She saw the muzzle flash. She saw death coming. She didn't even have time to flinch. Dante moved. He was not a man. He was a blur. He moved with a speed born of pure, primal adrenaline. He threw himself in front of her, shoving her back against the crates, shielding her with his own body. It was a heart-stopping moment. The sound of the rifle shot was deafening. Dante's whole body seized. A guttural, agonizing sound was ripped from his throat. He looked down at his own chest, a dark, blossoming stain on his white shirt. Then he looked at her. His eyes were wide, full of shock, and a strange, profound relief. "Dante!" she screamed, catching him as he slumped, his weight collapsing against her. The warehouse doors crashed open, and a dozen of Dante's other loyal men, the ones he had held in reserve, stormed in, opening fire, ending the fight in a matter of seconds. But Lucia didn't see it. She was on her knees on the concrete floor, cradling Dante's head in her lap. "Stay with me," she sobbed, pressing her hands to the wound, the hot, sticky blood pouring over her fingers. "Stay with me. Dante, you promised. You promised." His hand, shaking, came up to her face. He was trying to say something. "Mia Leonessa," he whispered, his voice a faint breath, and then his eyes closed. 6 months later. The sun was shining. It was a warm afternoon in May. The bell over the door of a small cafe on a quiet, tree-lined street jingled. The cafe was called Leo e Leonessa, the lion and the lioness. It was small, bright, and smelled of strong coffee and fresh-baked bread. Lucia was behind the counter, wiping it down, a clean white apron tied around her waist. She looked happy. The wariness was gone from her eyes. She was smiling. Dante Morelli walked in. He was not the same man. He was scarred. A thin, white line ran from his temple down his jaw, a memento from the surgery that had saved his life. He walked with a slight, almost imperceptible limp. He was wearing jeans and a simple gray Henley, the sleeves pushed up his forearms. He looked thinner, but he looked human. He looked retired. He had survived. He had given up his empire, brokered a truce, and walked away with his life, and with her. He walked behind the counter, slid his arms around her waist from behind, and buried his face in her hair. Inhaling. "Busy day," he murmured, his voice warm against her skin. She agreed, leaning back against his solid chest. "We sold out of the cannoli. You'll have to make more." He laughed, a real easy laugh, and kissed the side of her neck. He worked in the back, in the kitchen. He was a surprisingly good baker. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, cleaning up, getting ready for the next day's rush. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light into the empty cafe, he tilted her chin up, his expression soft. "Remember what you called me?" he asked, his dark eyes full of mischief. "That first day, in the trattoria." Lucia smirked, a wicked, beautiful smile. "You earned it." He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that lit his entire face. "Say it again, looking into my eyes." She stepped closer, her hands sliding up his chest, her eyes locked on his. She whispered it, the old Sicilian curse, and then she whispered something new. "Ti amo, bastardo." "I love you, bastard." He kissed her, hard, a deep, passionate, and promising kiss, right there in the middle of their little cafe. And the sun set. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment and say hello. If you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for new chapters and unforgettable tales. Please share your thoughts in English. We read every single one.